More than a century after the RMS Titanic vanished beneath the freezing waters of the North Atlantic, the ship's remains continue to inspire awe, sorrow, and fascination. Countless divees have documented its decaying decks, collapsing walls, and scattered relics. Yet it was during a recent Deep-Sea Mission 1, focused not on retrieval, but on mapping interior spaces, that a discovery emerged unlike anything previously recorded inside the wreck. A collection of hollow, aristocratic women's garments, resting silently on the surviving furniture, arranged with impossible elegance in rooms abandoned since 1912. Their presence, strangely intact and positioned as if waiting for absent owners, created a scene more haunting than any artifact cataloged before. The descent began before dawn, when the submersible slipped beneath the surface and left behind the last touch of daylight. Downward it traveled, through an ocean that grew darker and heavier with each passing meter, until the only world was the circular glow of the interior dash and the faint tremor of the hull resisting pressure. Nearly 4,000 meters below, the seabed rose like a shadowed continent, and soon the unmistakable silhouette of Titanic materialized, its bow still proud though broken, its interior spilling open like the exposed memory of a tragedy. Expedition's intention was to explore the midship passenger decks, specifically several first-class lounge areas whose access had become more difficult as the wreck continued to collapse. With care, the pilot maneuvered through a breach in the starboard hull. Inside, dust-like silt swirled upward, disturbed by the submersible's movement, the way breath stirs ancient dust in abandoned rooms. The corridor ahead was unrecognizable compared to its 1912 photographs. The carpets had dissolved, the gilded paneling had softened into shadow, and the ornate sconces lay as twisted remnants of brass. And yet, within this ruin, something pale and luminous reflected the submersible's light's dot. At first, it appeared to be sea life, perhaps a cluster of pale anemones wrapped around a collapsed chair. But as the beams steadied, the shapes resolved into something unmistakably human-made. Fabric, pleated and ruffled, cascading over the remnants of an armchair. When the silt settled, the expedition members realized they were looking at an aristocratic evening gown, still resting upright, as if worn by an invisible woman seated there long after the rest of the world had forgotten her dot. The gown was pale ivory, its surface overgrown with delicate sea sponge that resembled frost or lace. The bodice was perfectly shaped, yet entirely hollow, holding the posture of a seated figure, though nothing lived inside it. Thin tendrils of sponge formed a natural embroidery, drifting across the garment's curves, and the sleeves slender, tapered and adorned with faint remnants of beadwork floated gently with the current. It was an apparition made of silk and silence, preserved by chance, pressure, and darkness. The crew watched in stunned quiet as the camera drew closer. Clothing this intact was almost unheard of in such conditions. Most fabrics disintegrated decades ago, yet here was a gown retaining its form, as though someone had placed it deliberately upon the chair, rather than leaving it to the chaos of a sinking ship. The idea that the garment had remained untouched for more than 100 years was unbelievable, and yet its presence was undeniable. As the pilot rotated the submersible's lights, the rest of the room came slowly into view, on a chaise longue. Nearby rested another garment, a soft pink satin dress, its waist cinched by a delicate ribbon that had fused with sponge growth. The hem had gathered in gentle folds around the cushion beneath it, and the neckline shimmered beneath a layer of drifting sediment. Like the first gown, it appeared hollow, shaped by invisible shoulders that were no longer there. Shock turned to bewilderment. Two gowns could have been coincidence or the result of debris settling, but as the light swept across the far side of the lounge, more shapes appeared. On a faintly recognizable sofa lay a long silver evening cloak, its edges draped gracefully over the armrest. Across from it, perched upon a straight-backed chair, was a white Edwardian tea dress, its lace collar preserved beneath sponge that mimicked the very patterns of its original embroidery. Everywhere the beams touched, they revealed clothing fine. Aristocratic, unmistakably women's garments, placed with an elegance that defied explanation. The submersible documented each piece, moving slowly to avoid disturbing the fragile environment. The gowns seemed to float rather than rest, their skirts billowing in the faint underwater currents like ghosts still breathing. No human remains accompanied them. The ocean had taken every trace of the bodies that once wore them. Yet the shapes of the garments implied form, posture, presence like echoes of last movements that had somehow taken physical shape. The team entered the adjoining room, what had once been part of a first-class writing and sitting area. Much of the furniture was collapsed, but several chairs remained upright. On one of these chairs lay a deep sapphire blue gown, its color preserved unexpectedly well in a low-oxygen environment. The dress was slender and regal, with long sleeves and a high collar that had fused with the sponge growth in intricate patterns, as though nature had chosen to complete a design left unfinished by its original maker. Nearby, on a faintly fainting couch, rested a golden silk opera cloak, lined with faded velvet that had taken on a ghostly green hue beneath the ocean's touch. The cloak's folds retained the shape of a draped body, yet no bones, no jewelry, no hairpin or shoe remained. Only fabric in the hollow, human-like shape it still suggested. The pilot whispered through the intercom that the placement seemed too orderly. Nothing in the wreck generally remained so untouched. Chairs lay overturned. Furniture often collapsed. Debris scattered. But here, each garment rested with unnatural grace, perfectly centered on seats, as if gently arranged rather than violently thrown during the sinking. The team was cautious not to speculate, but the atmosphere inside the submersible tightened as they moved deeper through the sitting area. The lights illuminated yet another scene. A white Edwardian wedding gown sitting upright on a small love seat, its long train coiling across the floor like a pale river. The sleeves were puffed in classic early century fashion, and faint stitching still lined the bodice beneath layers of sponge. The collar, though softened by time, remained intact, circling the hollow neckline like a whisper of vows never spoken. A pair of gloves lay beside it, remarkably preserved, their fingers narrow and delicate. They appeared carefully placed, rather than lost in chaos. Beside them, resting on a faint wooden footstool, was a matching parasol, collapsed but unmistakably part of the same ensemble. It seemed impossible that such a fragile combination of objects had survived, let alone remained positioned together for over a century. The crew filmed in silence, aware that any accidental movement could destroy the delicate tableau forever. Each artifact was more haunting than the last. The dresses seemed to breathe. Their folds shifted with gentle underwater motion, giving them lifelike presence. The emptiness inside them was more unsettling than any skeletal remnant could have been. It suggested absence, disappearance, departure without explanation. The final chamber they explored was the remnants of a private first-class lounge. The once lavish carpet had melted into dust, but the furniture frames still lined the room. And there, arranged across 3 seats, were the most elaborate garments yet. On the left chair sat a burgundy velvet gown with embroidered gold thread, its hem decorated with tiny pearls that had fused with sea growth, shimmering faintly in the lights. In the center chair rested a high-collar ivory gown, layered with lace that had become encrusted with sponge patterns. And on the right, draped like a falling star, lay a silver-beaded evening dress, its intricate beadwork resembling constellations scattered across the seafloor. Together, they formed a trio of silent specters, as if 3 women had merely stepped away. The positioning was too symmetrical to be accidental. The gowns looked displayed, not lost. The ocean had preserved them with a tenderness it rarely offered. For nearly an hour, the crew documented every detail. The footage captured the way the lights shimmered off the beaded surfaces, the way each garment's hollowness created an outline more human than any artifact had the right to appear. The dresses seemed to tell stories of wealth, of elegance, of final nights beneath chandeliers, yet those stories were trapped behind silence and pressure. As the submersible eventually backed away, the garments drifted gently in its wake, as though the ship itself exhaled.